Hi, thanks so much for joining today. My name is Nick Graham, and I have the pleasure of leading the Consumer Insights and Analytics team for Pepsico's US Beverages business unit. So we manage pretty much everything from portfolio and category strategy through to supporting brands like Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Aquafina, LifeWater, Tropicana, Gatorade, Bubbly, Starbucks, Lipton, Rockstar, with developing new communication and innovation and seeing that through into the marketplace. But anyway, today I'm here to talk about big data, and specifically a passion of mine, which is how with this ever proliferating data stack, how do we really find the human insight, the actionable human insight in the midst of all of that data? So let's start off by just talking about big data. I think it's an understatement to say that this world is defined by big data, right? I think it's definitely true that data is the new oil. And we've all seen the statistics about the sheer amount of data that's been created over the last few years. And just think about all of the stuff in your household that's connected to the Internet of Things, or the amount of e-commerce purchasing, or the social media tweeting that you have been doing, and you alone are generating tens of hundreds of megabytes every single day. And so it's no surprise, right, that big data is big business. 97% of businesses, including businesses like Pepsico, are investing heavily in big data, data science, machine learning, and AI to really make the most of this. And so I thought for a little bit of fun, I'd just show you a snapshot of the data that's at my fingertips every single day. So from a social media perspective, on just one brand Pepsi, we had 160,000 tweets about that brand in the space of just 1 week. Now, admittedly, it was Super Bowl week and it was the run up to the Super Bowl halftime show. So you are right to assume that that's obviously where we get a lot of social media traffic. However, that's still just one brand in 1 week in one channel. Multiply that by all the brands in our portfolio, our competitors, not to mention the broader food and beverage landscape. So all the millions of conversations that are going on around different food and beverage, different occasions, different ingredients, different benefits, and suddenly 160,000 is really just the tip of the iceberg of the millions of conversations that we're mining for insight. Secondly, we capture every single month about 30,000 different consumption occasions for beverages across the US. Now, again, that really is just the tip of the iceberg, because underneath every single occasion, we're capturing the demographics of the person who's consuming, who they're with, where they are, where they consumed versus where they bought, what was in the consideration set, a whole host of factors. So again, very quickly, 30,000 becomes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of different data points. And then lastly, from a shopper perspective, we are capturing about 200 million shopping trips every single week. Now, again, the 200 million to me still seems like a lot of trips, but then each trip, we obviously have all of the different data points of the demographics of the shopper, the channel, where they are, what's in the basket, the prices that they're paying. So or hundreds of millions of data points. So suddenly, 210 million becomes a billion, and then it's every single week of the year. So you can imagine how that mounts up as we go through the year. And I think the bigger question, as fun as these statistics are, is with all of this big data and with all of this observational data, which I think we all fundamentally believe has the power to transform our function and transform our industry. Is our marketing getting better? Are our insights getting better? So it was an interesting 2019 Inc. survey of CMOs, and they asked them what the biggest issue was that they had with big data. And it was, of course, there's lots of questions around data privacy, data security, unification of data, the accuracy of data, and cleaning of data. But the number one issue by far was the fact that there was just a lack of actionable insights. So there was all of this data, but still it wasn't really transforming what we could do with it. Still great, but so what? What do I do with this? And it sort of reminded me a little bit, poor Samuel Taylor Coleridge, I'm just going to screw up his famous quote here, but it's sort of like data everywhere and not a drop more insight to be had. So why is this happening? Well, as we saw on the previous page, there's lots of challenges with big data and lots of issues that we must solve as an industry if we're going to really unlock the power of big data. But I think there's one thing that sometimes we neglect, right? Which is that even when you have beautifully cleaned, beautifully modeled data that's unified and beautifully regressed, the reality is it still needs context if you're going to make sense of it. You need some sort of context within which to understand it. I think many of us will have seen the book Spurious Correlations. If you have not seen it, I would recommend it certainly as a holiday gift for your the geek in your life, the data geek in your life, or the insights nerd in your life. It's a great book. And they have some brilliant correlations of things like the divorce rate in Maine and US margarine sales, and showing how perfectly correlated they are, and yet how entirely nonsensical it is that they would be in any way a real causation and correlation between those data points. But what it shows really to me is that data just needs that context to be understood, to check that it really does make sense what you're seeing, and to know what to do about it, right? So if it makes sense, if you understand the driving force that's behind it, then you naturally maybe can find an opportunity, an aha moment to know what to do differently. And I think if we're talking about data needs context, for us as consumer marketing and insights professionals, I think we've got to remember that ultimately our context is human behavior, right? So the observable data that we're collecting is often related to the outcome of a decision that a human being has made, or a decision or something they felt or thought. The question is, why did they feel, think, and act in the way that they did? And so while I know we have lots of power and opportunity in big data, I guess what I'm saying is that without the better understanding of the context of human behavior, then we're not really going to fully unlock the power of big data. So, quick spot quiz, and obviously this is a fake spot quiz because this isn't a truly interactive session in quite the same way, but go with me anyway. So what do these three illustrious folks have in common? So Charlie Cook, who was the founder of the politics predictions reports, the Cook Report, and Elaine Allensworth, who was one of the academics behind Chicago's very successful freshman on track model, which was about getting freshmen to graduate from high school. And then David Ogilvy, the father of modern advertising. So I gave you a clue on the previous page, I guess, as I was talking about this, which was, I think what's powerful about the way that all three of these have approached prediction and getting to something, a powerful insight, is they did through a combination of data and an understanding of human psychology. And I think that powerful connection is what's really incredibly successful behind these three people and the work that they've done. So the Cook Report, for example, obviously relies on a lot of data around polling, demographics, economics, but also for a lot of the House races, they actually profile and interview the candidates for those House races to get a better understanding of their psychology and how they're going to deal with the pressures of being in the race. Equally, Elaine Allensworth and the team relied on a huge amount of data, observable data around student performance and attendance and how often they were in class. And what they saw in the data was that when students weren't fully present in terms of from attendance perspective in ninth grade, that was highly predictive of their future performance. But what the team needed was an understanding of student psychology, like what was so important about ninth grade and why was that so highly correlated with future success? And it was actually understanding just the psychological importance of that moment, of that transition moment into ninth grade, and how it suddenly disrupts students' lives. That was the big unlock, as to understand not just what the data was telling them, but why it mattered and what they could do about it. And then, of course, David Ogilvy, who the fountain of many quotes for presentations like this, has often been quoted as saying it's the power of the data about the consumer, but then really getting to the deeper why behind that, right? So why does somebody feel and think and act in that way? And in short, that's exactly what we try to practice at Pepsico, which is the synthesis of the big data and the thick data that is so important, right? So this sort of suggests they're two separate worlds, but of course there's fluidity and there's dynamism between these two. But just for the purposes of simplification, it really is about that connection between the machine, the data science, algorithms, the objectivity of data and of quantitative data, and the whats that come from looking at data, with a deeper understanding of the why, right? Of the an empathy for the human being behind the ones and zeros, and what I like to call the human science in response to the data science. Now, it is really important. I am not saying that one is more important than the other. I'm not saying that big data is not important. All I'm saying is I think our job as an insights professional is to be fluent in both of these and to effectively weave them together, right? And to act as an interpreter for the business and an interpreter for the data, whether that's thick data that needs interpreting and validating and challenging with big data, or big data that needs the context of thick data to make sense and to unlock an actionable insight. So to that, let me share 3 quick examples of how we're doing this every day at PepsiCo. So I'll talk about Pure Leaf, Mountain Dew Amp Game Fuel, which is our functional gaming beverage, and then a tool that we built to better understand and predict future trends in the beverages landscape. So let's start with Pure Leaf. So we had a lot of data about Pure Leaf, and what the brand team were really trying to do was really trying to unlock a powerful new positioning and a powerful tension, a consumer tension that could really unlock new positioning and a long-lasting brand idea for Pure Leaf. So we had a lot of data on Liz, who was our target. We knew she was higher income, she was in her late 30s, she was highly educated, she was working, she had kids. And from all of the quantitative data we had on her and a ton of social scraping that the team had done, we knew she felt very overwhelmed, very anxious, very stressed. And the number one thing that she was yearning for from the data that was coming to us was around simplicity. We'd seen this huge spike in conversation from the Liz target about this need to simplify life and declutter her life. Now, we could have just stopped there, but that on its own wasn't enough, right? There wasn't exactly a tension there because we didn't really know why. And when we first sat and looked at the data, we could extrapolate why that might be the case, but it all sort of led to very simple understanding of human behavior. And we knew there was something deeper behind that. So what we did is we took that big data and we paired it with projective ethnography work that helped us really get to the deeper why behind that yearning for simplicity. What we learned from talking to people like Liz was there was this real fear of saying no. Liz had been taught that no was a bad word, right? It had gotten a bit of a bad rap. People who said no were uncooperative, they were unsupportive, they were negative. And she felt this pressure to say yes to everything. Now, she was putting the pressure on herself as an amazing working mom, but also she felt the pressure of society. She felt, she looked at her social media feed and she saw all of her friends doing these incredible things. And she felt this pressure and this unrealistic expectation to do the same. So saying no felt difficult and it felt like it was the wrong thing to do. What we found in that is this empowering Liz to be able to say no and making her realize the freeing power of no. That's really what was behind simplicity. But telling Liz to just simplify her life was a little bit of a pat response. Helping Liz to say no was ultimately the unlock that we found. And the result was the No is Beautiful campaign, which launched at the end of last year. Incredible campaign. I really do encourage you to go and look for it on YouTube. And I'm delighted to say that literally of a couple of weeks ago, it's been shortlisted for 3 ARF David Ogilvy Awards for the power of the insight behind it. So I think that's a good example of where we knew something from big data, but the thick data told us really the why behind it that helped unlock a powerful comms idea. Now, let me flip the switch for a second and talk about the Mountain Dew Amp Game Fuel, which is our functional gaming beverage. So this is kind of the opposite, right? So we started with thick data on this brand. It was actually the big data that flipped things on its head. So when we started to get into the world of esports, we did some really incredible thick data research, some qualitative research and ethnographies with the really sort of hardcore, sort of semi-professional gamers. So those that are sort of now the teenagers who are winning the championships or the ones just before that. So that talks a lot about gaming and the professionalism of gaming and the functionality that gamers were looking for, and really helped us develop a product in Gamefuel that was designed for their functional needs. One of the things as well it sort of showed us was that the model of aspiration, like who these people aspire to be, seemed very similar to the model that we had from Gatorade, right? And the years and years of work that we've done with athletes, which seemed to be, there's really this sort of apex model where it seemed like the hardcore gamers wanted to be the professional gamers. They aspired to that sort of functionality and excellence and expertise that the pro gamers represented. Now, what was interesting is it wasn't wrong. It was absolutely right from the data that we had. But then, as we started to move into the launch year and beyond of the product, we did a bigger deep dive using big data, so social data, quantitative data, behavioral data, looking at how long people were gaming, what else they were doing, who they were following on social media. And one thing really struck us as we looked at the sort of regular gamers, still identified as gamers, still really found gaming to be a huge part of their lives. One of the things that really struck us is they did not behave like the model suggested, like the thick data model had suggested, right? They were much broader in their identity. And they didn't really identify with pro gamers, because for them, pro gamers were really sort of out of reach, and they didn't see gaming as being necessarily how they wanted their profession and their career, even though they were really serious about gaming. So for them, the hardcore gamers, the ones who were the people we'd actually talked to in that first round, they were the aspiration, because they felt like they'd showed skill and excellence, but it wasn't their complete life. And the other interesting thing that we saw is as we listened to the social conversations about what they were looking for, it was as much about escape and the sort of distraction factor of gaming as it was really about the functionality and the sheer fact of winning. And so what was interesting from that is it completely turned on its head, the model of how we were thinking about this audience. And it also really helped us think very differently about the messaging. So we'd really been about this apex model, and we'd really been thinking about functionality. And what the big data helped do is really challenge that model and say, well, actually your target is broader. Your gaming target, your serious gaming target is actually much broader than that, but they don't behave in that way. And they're actually looking for an identity that's a little bit more accessible, and they're looking for messaging and claims that's more than just about functionality. So that's really helped us continue to evolve our messaging to be relevant to that audience. And then last but by no means least, wanted to share an example of something where we have over the last few years in the US Beverages team, we've built this incredibly powerful tool designed to predict future beverage trends, so the different ingredients and benefits and attributes that consumers are looking for. It's based off of e-com data, search data, social media data, scraping those hundreds of millions of different conversations and looking for predictive trends about essentially using a lookalike model to understand what is likely to be a bubble and what is likely to sustain. One of the challenges though with it is that it really gives us a lot of what's, but it doesn't necessarily explain the why behind that. And so you can still sometimes see trend bubbles appearing, or you don't know they're a bubble at the time, because we don't quite necessarily know from this data set the why behind it. And so our trends aren't always as accurate or as sort of actionable as we would like them to be. So what we've done over the last year is built a thick data layer on top, or sort of say around that big data core. So using things like consumer surveys, a leading edge panel, input from key opinion leaders, Instagram scrubbing as well, to help us really give some context to that big data. So what we can now do is we can use the thick data to better inform and understand some of the big data trends and algorithm outputs that we're seeing, and understand, well, is that really a trend? Because actually what the thick data would suggest is that there isn't really anything fundamental behind it. It feels a little bit more like a fad. So a good example of some of this was, just over the last 6 months, we'd seen with the first wave of COVID, we'd seen a huge spike in conversation from the big data about energy management. So this obviously, all of us, right, and feeling like this need for energy, feeling actually drained from an energy perspective. But what was also interesting is we'd seen this huge decline, about 25% decline in conversations around caffeine, which sort of seemed counterintuitive when you typically imagine those things going together. But what we did is by overlaying the FIC data analysis, what we understood was really going on was that there was a nuancing and a fragmentation of what energy meant to consumers. So whereas energy traditionally been a very sort of singular up, like I'm feeling low in energy and I need to go up. What we saw is that some of the reasons behind why energy management was becoming so top of mind was people were just really feeling stressed and anxious, and that was really what was depleting their energy. And then the other piece was that people were lost during their days. I think we probably all felt that, which is without the transitions and the markers of commuting and meal times and going out and coming back, their days just felt sort of endless and they all blurred into one another. And that was actually creating stress for people and anxiety. And so actually what it helped us understand that if we just looked at the big data, we would have either just been confused and not known what to do about it, or we could potentially have gone to the wrong conclusion, which was that, let's say, caffeine was not the way people wanted to get up energy anymore. But actually, what we saw was that there were two things that we could do. One was to help try and bring products to the market that would help people better manage their stress and help them relax. And some of you will have probably seen the press release that went out a few weeks ago now, around Driftwell, which is our new sleep and relaxation brand. And that was very much designed to help with this space. And then the other piece was, what can we do through the brands and services that we have to help create markers for people through their day? And again, I don't think any of that would have come from just looking at the big data. It was overlaying the the FIC data that made it so powerful. So wrapping us up, I just want to kind of leave you with a thought, which is, and all credit of this goes to the marketing guru, Jay Bayer, but I'm not saying that big data isn't important. I'm just saying that the future of marketing isn't just about big data. It's ultimately about getting to bigger understanding. And for me, I think that's going to come from understanding the big data and the thick data. It's the data science combined with the human science that's ultimately going to get us to sharper and more actionable insights. So with that, my time is definitively up. And so I'm going to hand over to the non-virtual version of myself, who's going to answer any questions that people might have. So thanks very much.